Henri Matisse was supposed to be a lawyer, but then he has to go and get appendicitis. And at the age of 21, he finds himself leaving Paris, where he'd been at school, and back at home at his family's place, recuperating from the operation. In those days, it wasn't a couple days in the hospital and out. It was about a year long. And so as he's lying in bed, moaning and whining, his mom says, I have to come up with something to keep him busy because he is driving me nuts. So she goes to the store and brings him home a Teach Yourself to Paint book and a set of paints. A year passes by, and Matisse is finally ready to go back to Paris. But not as a lawyer. He's going back to be a painter. His parents weren't really happy about this, but what could he do? Matisse was in love with painting. And in 1905, he and his friend André Derain show a series of new canvases that are bold and almost frightening in their intensity. Whereas the Impressionists had been using blobs of color on canvas to create hazy, tranquil, placid effects, Matisse is using clashing primaries to create these almost violent juxtapositions of color. And the shapes that he's painting are bold and crude and primitive. Very primitive, in fact. The way these canvases look, people are almost frightened of them. The critics say it looks like they've been painted by wild beasts. And in French, the word for wild beast is fauve. So Derain and Matisse get labeled fauvists. His painting is spontaneous and energetic. It's filled with these clashing primary colors, but the other thing it's full of is influences from African folk art, Polynesian wood carvings, and other totems from primitive cultures. Matisse was fascinated by these things and had been working this sort of imagery and simplicity and raw power of these things into what he had been doing. This was part of a whole movement that was sweeping through Paris and Europe at the time, known as Primitivism. The whole idea behind Primitivism is that somehow these primitive cultures were more true and more pure and more vital, filled with the wisdom of the ages instead of having lost everything to technology and heavy-duty society the way the rest of Europe had. This was something of an intellectual fad going around at the time, and Matisse was one of the reasons this was so popular. What does this stuff look like? Well, it's very bold and it's very simple. It's kind of creepy. A typical mask might look something like this. Now, just from looking at this, you can see that there's something unsettling about it. There's something very powerful and mysterious. And it was exactly these powerful and mysterious qualities that intrigued Matisse about this sort of folk art. Matisse was replacing true representation in his paintings with an expression of emotion. His paintings derived from the psychedelic works of Van Gogh and Munch, and these sorts of powerful things were all elements that he was incorporating into his work, trying to make something that was more powerful and more pure than had been seen in Europe previously. Aside from changing the way everyone looked at color, especially the Expressionists who had asked Matisse to join, Fauvism changed the way everyone looked at primitive art, including one gentleman named Pablo Picasso, who was about to drop a bomb on the art world. In 1907, Picasso unveils a painting called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and this painting is notable for two reasons. One is clear evidence of a strong African art influence in this painting. Some of the faces of the women in this painting look almost identical to African masks. The other is this painting is clearly the seeds of something that Picasso is going to develop called Cubism, something he'll be working on with his friend Georges Braque in the years to come. This painting is bold and almost frightening in its intensity, and the art world is simply shocked by it. But at the time, it's just another example of the primitivism sweeping through Europe. People are very excited about the sheer exoticness of it all, the reveling in ancient cultures. And one of the people who's in Paris around this time is a man named Igor Stravinsky. Igor Stravinsky was born in 1882. A Russian, he came from a musical home. His father sang bass at the Imperial Opera. He played piano, but mostly at an amateur level. His folks also wanted him to be a lawyer, so that's what he did, working on music on the side and at night. But like most people who are working on music on the side or at night, he's got big ambitions. And at age 20, he submits his music to a man named Rimsky-Korsakov and ends up studying with Rimsky-Korsakov for the next 3 years. Rimsky-Korsakov is one of the first great Russian composers. He's perhaps best known for The Flight of the Bumblebee and Scheherazade. Rimsky-Korsakov was a commissioned naval officer and largely self-taught, and he wrote the first Russian symphony in 1867. He also had a gang called the Mighty Five, which was basically just a fancy name for him and his composer friends. And like most musicians, they had one thing in common, which was hatred for the popular music of the day. In this day, in Russia, the popular music was Tchaikovsky, and they hated Tchaikovsky's music because they saw it as flowery and wimpy, and they didn't want their music to be anything like that. They felt that Russian music should be much more macho and manly and strong. So they'd put Slavic folk tunes in their work, drank a lot, and generally treated their women badly. There was only one problem. The ruling class happened to like Tchaikovsky, and worse, Rimsky-Korsakov was a Democrat. This doesn't sit too well with the imperials. It's pretty clear that Korsakov had a tremendous influence on Stravinsky. Korsakov's work is filled with strange scales, odd chords, and crazy rhythms. Unlike many of our other composers, Stravinsky is blessed with early success. At age 28, he premieres a ballet in Paris called Firebird. It's extraordinarily successful. It's popular, it's accessible, it sounds something like the music of the day with enough of the weird Rimsky-Korsakov folk tunes and things mixed in to make it interesting to people. Firebird also has some impressionist leanings, aside from the Rimsky-Korsakov style irregular meters from Russian folk music, elements of popular song and dance. But mostly, it's seen as a vibrant new talent asserting itself. He's only 28. Stravinsky's big thing is rhythm, which is one of the reasons that ballets work so well for him. In fact, his next major work is also a ballet, and it's also successful. It's called Petrushka. So we have a young man who's almost 30 years old. He's in Paris during the time Primitivism is sweeping through it, and he's got 2 big hit ballets to his name. So what happens? In Stravinsky's words, I had dreamed of a scene of a pagan ritual in which a young virgin dances herself to death. Well, you can see that this idea is the epitome of the primitivism that's sweeping through Europe. And Stravinsky is so fascinated by this notion that he sits down to write a ballet around this climactic final scene. In 1913, he debuts a work called Le Sacre du Printemps, translated The Rite of Spring. It causes quite a commotion at its premiere. For one thing, the choreography was done by Nijinsky and was very controversial for a number of reasons, not the least of which was the way the scantily clad women were leaping up and down the stage. For another, there was the music. It was rhythmic. It was angular. It didn't really have melodies the way people were used to hearing them. It started off with a bassoon playing way up in its upper register, something that was just not done at the time. People had never heard an instrument sound that way. The rhythms were irregular, jagged, jarring. This piece really upset the audience. It upset them so much, in fact, that at its premiere, there were riots. There were hoots, screams, people slapping each other and claiming that what they heard that night, at that moment, constituted nothing less than an attempt to destroy music as an art. It's hard to explain just how controversial this piece was. When was the last time you heard about a group of people at a classical music concert rioting and beating each other up because of what they heard? What happened was there was a problem with the expectations of the audience and the expectations of the performer. The audience had come to this performance thinking they were going to see a traditional, typical ballet. The curtain goes up, and instead of seeing normal costumes, they see these nubile, half-naked young girls vaulting across the stage. And instead of music that they were familiar with, they heard this crazy stuff that sounded like it was from Mars for all they knew. They almost thought that they were being made fun of. They felt ripped off. The critics couldn't stand it. They felt that Stravinsky was playing some sort of giant joke on them. What had happened to the wonderful hit-making youth that they had loved, who had brought them their beloved Firebird and Petrushka just a few years before? But by 1 year later, everyone was talking about this piece as perhaps the greatest achievement of music so far. Some were even calling it the most influential score of the century. This was 1914, which also meant that it was the start of World War I. Stravinsky would break his ties to Russia and eventually move to France. And his Rite of Spring would be one of the most influential pieces in the history of 20th century music.